We have one last session, and it's a fabulous session.
It's easy.
We've got a panel, and what the panel's focusing on is what are the next steps to support equitable access. And I want you to welcome our fabulous panel members. So you've already met Lalita, haven't you? But we also have Sharam Jazam, who's a case manager in Humanitarian Settlement Services for the Multicultural Development Association. Sharam is originally from Iran and arrived in Australia 12 years ago. So since he's been here, he's attained a diploma in counselling and mental health and a Bachelor of Social Work. Sharam has been involved in a number of community organisations and was an inaugural committee member of Amparo Advocacy and a committee member of the National Ethnic Disability Alliance for a number of years. Then we have Kevin Cox, who is well known to most of you, I would think. He's a highly respected human rights and disabilities advocate. Kevin is Queensland's Anti-Discrimination Commissioner. He was appointed in the beginning of 2011 and holds that office until the end of next year. Kevin has a Master of Social Welfare Administration and Planning from the University of Queensland, and he's received a number of community recognition awards, including an Order of Australia in 2010 for promoting human rights for people with disability in Australia. And of course, Lalita Lakshmi is the multicultural engagement worker with Amparo, and she's already known to you. So, fabulous panel, please make them welcome. Now, in the previous session, we've heard a lot. I think we heard a lot about concerns that people from CALD communities will miss out on accessing the NDIS, particularly refugees who have a disability, and including those people with a psychosocial disability due to many barriers. And we've heard quite a bit about the barriers today. So we're going to have some questions for the panel. And Kevin, you've got the first one. So how important is the implementation of additional measures to support equitable access of people from CALD backgrounds to the NDIS? And what have you heard today about what some of those might be?
Thanks, Leslie. Well, thinking about this question, I reflected on the intent of the insurance scheme. And the intent of the insurance scheme is to invest in individuals. So whereas to provide the basis for those individuals to be supported to function to their fullest capacity, which is determined by themselves and not others who historically have been seen as figures of authority. And in summary, for me, it is I who will define myself and not be defined by stereotypes and mythologies. And that, I think, is what the essence of the NDIS should be about. That's what its formation was about, and that's what we should hold dear to our hearts and fight for. When it comes to how important it is for people from CALD or refugee backgrounds, well, I think we have to also think about it in the context of bigger cultural change. And you heard my question earlier this morning about how the NDIA was measuring cultural change within their own staff in the context of how their values are changing. Well, I'm not sure if, and I was pleased to hear that would be taken on. but I'm not sure if any agency who has the carry for implementing such the biggest and most important policy Australia has seen since 1975, when Medibank was introduced, where this is going to change the lives of people with disabilities or people with impairment, their families, their brothers, their sisters, their neighbours, their communities, our society. And that is what the staff of the NDIA are charged with, and that is what people who are gathered in this room today also have the challenge to take up. So for me, the cultural change that I believe needs to happen is that impairment is seen as part of the human condition. Each person will have common needs, and needs that will be particularly unique to the individual, which may be related to that person's functionality, but it'll also be related to their social situation, their cultural situation, their economic situation, their lived experience. We're all human beings, thus our human needs are universal. The need to be loved, to love, be safe, take risks, pursue our dreams, to be valued and respected, treated with dignity, and live our lives free from discrimination. This is a paradigm shift that we are looking for, that we are calling for. That is a fundamental paradigm shift that the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities espouses, and that is the paradigm shift the National Disability Strategy espouses, and that is the paradigm shift that the NDIS espouses. And if it doesn't espouse it, we espouse it for it. As individuals and collectives, we must create spaces where we all can flourish, irrespective of our race, our religious belief, or our capacity. This is a challenge that lies in front of us all. And so what are the practical things that need to start to happen for this paradigm shift to occur in our lifetimes? Firstly, there needs to be capacity building of the community, not the disability service provider community, not the government agencies, but about the communities that we all live in. The community needs to be welcoming and engaging of people who come from different cultures, different religious beliefs, as well as welcoming persons with impairment. At the cornerstone of any community that will flourish and is welcoming, there are freely given relationships. Each individual will define their own identity, and each individual will have power to define that identity and the power to define the politics of that community. And the second thing is the need for individual advocacy and systemic advocacy, independent. To navigate the disability system as it exists today requires years of practice and particular skill development in engagement of that system, let alone when we have to engage an appeal or a complaint system. When we know the structural challenges, the structural discrimination that exists in our bureaucracies and our appeal mechanisms, we will need strong and independent advocacy to stand alongside vulnerable people, because as I said earlier, we will all have our nemesis and we will all be limited when we are faced in the imbalance of power. That's the answer.
Okay, thank you. turn the microphone on. It is on.
It's on.
It's on. I'll just ask you your question. Thank you, Kevin. Now, Shahram, you work with refugees who are settling in Australia, and you know what it's like to settle in a new country with no English, no understanding of systems, and also being someone who has a disability. From listening to today, what do you think the key issues are? What do you think we need to address so that people such as your clients can actually access this scheme, the NDIS?
Thank you, Rosie. Good afternoon, everyone. Just to address this issue, if we want to start about the issue, it's a lot. Actually, I came in 2003 to Australia, as you mentioned, without no English, vision impairment, and also I was running from the discrimination facing back to home, my country, because of my personal belief and also my disability. So I came here and I was facing somehow same thing because I couldn't understand the system. I couldn't understand English. I was a little bit isolated, not little bit actually, very isolated, and no network until I met people and they introduced me to community. Yes, I'm working with lots of clients who got a disability. Currently, I'm working with a lady from Iran. She came on visa to 309, which is a partnership visa. She's a vision impaired and she's a blind lady with her husband. She's married to her husband, also blind, came here. She's facing lots of challenges, such as education. Was 3-4 weeks ago when I took her to one of the institutions to just enroll her for the English, the AMEP program. They look at her as someone from another planet, to be honest. They said, oh, she's going to disturb the class. She can't see. How are you going to address, how she's going to read the paper? I introduced them to the technology. The technology such as scanner, a screen reader, a laptop. And I said, this is the person who can read and can, but they said, oh, so does she need an interpreter? I said, no, she's here to learn English. Listen to this one. I quite was frustrated and disappointed with the system. How does it work? They said to me, oh, yes, we got an interpreter. But this is yes, we got someone with hearing impairment, and she's got an interpreter, a sign language. But probably she can help your client. I said, person with a vision impairment, how are they going to communicate together with a sign language? You believe it or not. So I was very disappointed, and I'm still advocating on behalf of this client. So this is the challenges. Guys, we need to educate the community. We need to start educate the people who studying at the university as a student. It's a huge stigma, still a huge stigma. I don't see anything in the TV about people with a disability. No it's all advertisement, which is commercial advertisement, and nothing about people with a disability. I got a client who's been here for 1 year from Eritrea. He's been introduced to be, he's referred from another agency. And when I look at him, the client cannot hear and cannot cannot comprehend. Even in his own language, he does not comprehend. I realized that he's got disability. Nobody has diagnosed him for being 1 year in Australia. So this is the challenges as a social worker that I am facing at the moment. Centrelink, I referred him to Centrelink to apply for the disability pension. They said, oh, he has to go to find a job, but no English, no hearing, with a hearing impairment, and TAFE also is not helping as well. So this is the challenges that people with a disability are still facing. When I took my client to that institution, and I said to them, look, I am a person with a disability. To be honest, I studied here. When I came to Australia about 13 years ago, I heard the same message. And it's still, after 13 years, it's still the same thing. So this is the challenges that we're still facing, guys. And I hope with NDIS, who can make some changes. Yeah, that's from me.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Lalita, listening to the many speakers today, there seems to have been quite a lot of similar themes and issues that have been raised. So what are some of the things you've heard, and what do you think needs to be done so that the NDIA hears these issues, and more importantly, how, then to act to actually address them?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks, Leonie, and that's a really good question. I guess just to what I've heard today is that COL communities do best when there's a variety of approaches and strategies in place to support them. So we can't just have one thing. I think Mercy in New South Wales talked about some of the approaches they use, and Megan in Victoria was using different ones. So it can't just be one thing. We need to really look, and I guess because it's a new system, really try lots of different things and learn from each other. I think I've been hearing that everybody thinks, despite maybe some limitations at the moment, that the NDIS is a really good thing, and it's going to be a much fairer system for people from COL backgrounds and everybody with disability. It won't matter, we hope that it won't matter what region you're in or what locality, you will have much more fairer and equitable access to the supports that you need, and the supports that are most appropriate for you. But again, we just can't rely on a one-size-fits-all in terms of getting information out to communities or expecting people to come to our office or ring a 1-800 number. I think just speaking to everyone in the audience today, there's lots of old and very familiar faces. There's so much commitment in the audience, so a lot of people have been working to try and make things fairer and more equitable for many, many years. So we've got a lot of experience and a lot of commitment and passion. And I guess I'm just wondering, in terms of Leonie, what you said about what needs to be done so the NDIA hears our message. I'm wondering if it's better if we can continue this work to work together, maybe speak in a unified voice so that we have clear messages and we work together so that the NDIA can hear those. So rather than us just leaving this forum and waiting another year or so for another forum, we can maybe try to work together from this point to really see some improvement in the strategies or the approach, what we think might make a difference, sharing all our collective knowledge and skills. I don't know, what do you think about that idea, Leonie?
I think that's a great idea, and that leads us into, I guess, hearing from you. So this is your last opportunity to put your hand up and ask a question. So who have we got right up the back, a hand shot up very quickly?
Hi there. Traditionally, disability services in Australia are white middle class, I'll say it, big white elephant in the room. They're church-based. They might come from good parents 60 years ago, fundraising and what have you, and a company was born. And I think there's a lot of disconnect between community networks and peak bodies doing really great things, and some people with large voices doing really great things in the cold space, but there's a disconnect in then getting the mainstream middle class white disability service providers on board. And I'm wondering how we can close that gap. I think there's some really good statistics and really good research pieces and everything else, but I don't necessarily see that then translating into service provision at a mainstream level. Noting that mainstream, I use that broadly for some of the big fish. So the big fish organisations in Queensland, they're potentially the ones who've got visibility in way of advert space or people know their name, but people don't know or if they can support coal communities, and even if they are culturally competent. So how do we close that gap and disconnect between the mainstream larger disability service providers and all this great work that's happening in the smaller grassroots space, advocacy space? How do we close that gap?
Okay.
I don't know who's the best person, Leslie, for that one, but...
Well, I think we'll throw it to the entire panel and see who comes up with an answer. Who'd like to?
I'm just going to start just while the others have a little think, and I think that's a really good point that you make. In one regional area I went to, before I went, I rang up 17 different disability services and said, I can provide information about the NDIS to people from COLD, I'll use interpreters. And there were only 2 people of all those 17 organisations that they said were from COLD background, and one of those had left that service. And for some of them it was the start of a conversation. It was as if they'd never thought about that before. So I really agree with what you're saying there. There's a lot of work to be done. However, I don't think we wait for those organisations. I think, as I was saying, I think there's lots of commitment, and I think it's really best to start with those that want to start the work rather than try and drag those along with them. And I think with this new system, people do have that choice to change if they're not happy, and I think that will be a really important thing for coal communities.
Yes, indeed.
I think I agree, and it goes a little bit back to what I said before, is about us taking control within our own communities and spreading that out, because if we're going to rely on the vested interests to change without from a goodwill or a values basis to change what they've been doing for 150 years, then we'll be having this conversation. Well, we won't be, our great-grandchildren will be, in 100 years' time. There's just the notion that people with disabilities are only deserving of status of welfare recipients as opposed to being right bearers is a conversation we have to have. We still hear in the politicians' rhetoric, we still hear in service provider land, that rhetoric of being the powerless, the disempowered, and deserving only of welfare. The thing about the NDIS, I'm not totally a market person, but there is some opportunities that people can take their funding themselves and go to somewhere that hopefully they can find somewhere that will provide an opportunity. But it also provides the opportunity to directly attack the elephant in the room and to get like-minded people to work together and operate in cooperatives and working with the broader community, because I think, you don't need a Certificate 3 from TAFE in disability care. I would run probably much faster before I had my accident if I saw somebody with a Certificate 3 in disability care coming to apply for a job with me. And because they've been educated in the welfare mentality. So we have to start to demand a lot of changes in a lot of systems, and you know, when people do have money to purchase services, that is a beginning. I'm not saying there's not a lot of pitfalls around, and there will be vulnerable people like we see, you know, fall for the glossy, groovy magazines or marketing about the services. And as we've seen just last week with all the 4 big banks saying sorry for ripping off bank customers who are fairly empowered, we do have to be very careful about the marketplace. But it is a leverage point.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, do we have another question? Yes? Oh, you'll need the microphone. Yep, here you are. Yeah.
You won't need the, because I'm having a special. So hi again, everyone. As I said, I'm an NDIA champion, and there have been concerns raised from people who are in authority in the organisation for which I work about people being able to look at their goals and aspirations. And the problem is people knowing about those sorts of things, and people from a cold background or people having a disability being able to have relationships and have those decisions made for them. Those specialist skills for people who work in the disability area, to be able to develop those relationships with people and have people with disability trust them, and to be able to frame different types of questions within that framework that are inoffensive to people with disabilities, and not have to make those decisions on their behalf. And people saying that they don't have right to have relationships of all types, whether it be relationships within a family, relationships as far as partners are concerned. I think there has to be a great deal of care taken with the types of people who can talk about these types of things, whether it be those types of relationships or religion or cold or any of those types of things. There are many problems created, I think, with the lack of communication and the lack of sensitivity about people being told they have a disability and you aren't able to do whatever it is that they have the aspiration to do.
Oh God, I've got to open these calls.
And people who have disabilities being able to be allowed to be in relationships of any type that they want to. So I think it's quite a difficulty that people are still being spoken of, as you say, Kevin, in that welfare model.
Thank you. Anyone on the panel want to respond? It was more a comment, I think, and a very good one. Thank you.
I would like to respond to the everyone having to have goals and objectives yearly for their lives. How many people in this room who don't have a disability have documented their goals and objectives for the next 6 months? And tell the government department.
I'd like to go back to the idea a couple of speakers ago in relation to capturing the goodwill and the huge amount of expertise that's represented in this room, to see if we can pull together like-minded organisations and individuals and not lose the momentum that we have brought together today under the auspice of Griffith University and the many other organisations that are represented. Perhaps because we're talking about cold people, perhaps we should ask Amparo if they would be interested in coordinating a mini meeting of representatives from organisations like QDN that I represent and other disability organisations in Queensland to nut out a strategy to support the work that Amparo has done and the recommendations it has in its excellent report. And I think there's strength in numbers that way, and it would show that even if, say, QDN doesn't have a specific interest in the CALD disability area, but it can support what needs to be done in this area for Queensland.
What a great rallying cry, and indeed this is where we had hoped to get to with this whole event. You know, we've discussed a lot of really important issues, and those are the issues that will impact on how well people from CALD backgrounds are included in the NDIS. And so we're posing a question to you, the stayers. Who are there people in this audience who are interested in taking these issues forward as part of a working group? So if you could put your hand up if you are. Terrific. Because it always, you know, I think we do need a working group, and it always takes collective action to actually move forward on so many of these issues. And if we're really serious about affecting change, it's going to take that kind of collective action. So, as you know, we've got an online survey, and you can indicate on that if you're interested, and we will undertake to take that forward. But also you might just want to ask Kevin or Lalita or Shahram, you might want to have a conversation with them straight after the session today. Because
could I just respond a tiny bit to what you said there too, just in terms, because you did mention would Amparo carry it forward, and though I think we've got a lot of enthusiasm and would love to, we do have some capacity issues as well. So we're only a very small staff. I don't know if we're quite four positions in the whole of the organisation. So just knowing from previous working groups are really good and really powerful. They do take some coordination, and so it's something we'd be very interested to support. But I guess that survey is really important that Leonie was talking about, just in terms of who might be able to do some heavy lifting. If you can only do a bit of light housework, that's okay too, or light lifting, that's okay. But or I guess when you're talking about other organisations, just in terms of capacity or what support might be able to be provided, that would be really useful too. But
okay.
That's a great response. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So please join with me. Let's thank the panel. And it's time for closing, but I'd really like to thank Amparo, QDN and crew for partnering with us at Griffith for this, our 9th symposium. I can't believe we've done 9. Particularly want to thank the students and staff from Indooroopilly State High School who did the filming. You've got to get them young. And thank you again to all of our generous sponsors, QCOS, Access Community Services, MDA, MAMRAE, QPAST, Diversicare, Speaking Up for You, Rights in Action, the Townsville Multicultural Support Group and Independent Advocacy in Townsville. So thank you to all our speakers who've given their valuable time and to be here, and especially those who've travelled far, and particularly the people from the NDIA who travelled and came here. So can we also give a big hand for our Auslan interpreters? To all our wonderful volunteers, where are you all? Thank you. And to our amazing symposium organisers, you do not get in the way of these women. Misty Herman, Tracy Hartman, Margaret Ward. I just do as I'm told.